In the 8th century Middle East, a new dynasty seized control of one of the world's greatest empires, the Islamic Caliphate. Though little remembered in the West today, the Abbasids reigned for 5 centuries. They oversaw an era of Islamic military dominance, city building, brilliant scholarship, and technological innovation. It has come to be remembered as Islam's golden age. This is the story of the Abbasid Caliphate. (632 AD). In the Arabian city of Medina, the Prophet Muhammad lies dead. His followers, professing the new religion of Islam, sweep across the Arabian Peninsula, uniting it under the rule of Abu Bakr, the first Caliph, God's deputy on earth. Then they burst upon the world stage, taking on the 2 superpowers of the Middle East, the Eastern Roman and Sassanid empires. Both are vulnerable after decades of war, and the Muslims wage a stunning campaign, winning victory after victory. By 651, they have overrun 2/3 of the Eastern Roman Empire and almost all of the Sassanid Empire. But in 656, the 3rd Caliph, Uthman, is assassinated, sparking the first Muslim civil war, or fitna. Ali, cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, has the support of the people. But he's opposed by the governor of Syria, Uthman's kinsman, Muawiyah. 5 years of bloodshed culminate in Ali's assassination at Kufa. Muawiyah emerges triumphant and establishes a new Umayyad caliphate. Further conquests helped to forge one of the largest empires in history. But it is riven by more civil war. One challenge comes from Hussein, son of Ali, grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. He opposes the succession of Muawiyah's son, Yazid. But in 680, he and his followers are defeated and killed at the Battle of Karbala. Supporters of Ali and his descendants will later become the Shiites. They still commemorate Hussein's death each year, on the day of Ashura. The vast Umayyad Caliphate continues to expand, but it contains serious internal divisions. Much of what we know about the Umayyad Caliphate comes from later sources, often hostile. But it seems clear that the small Arab Muslim elite that dominated this great empire was increasingly unpopular with many of its subjects, including some of those later termed dhimmi. These were non-Muslims, including Christians, Jews and Zoroastrians, who were treated as an underclass and made to pay extra tax. Even those who did convert to Islam, known as Mawali, were often treated as second-class subjects. Decades of discontent were about to boil over. The symbol of Umayyad authority was their white banner. But in 747, a new symbol rises to challenge their rule: the black banners of the Abbasids. The Abbasids are an Arab family, descended from the Prophet Muhammad's uncle Al-Abbas, from whom they take their name. They and their supporters believe this blood tie to the Prophet gives them legitimate claim to the title of Caliph, far more so than the Umayyads, whom the Abbasids later portray as decadent and despised. The Abbasids promise a return to true Islam, to correct teachings and moral leadership, and sent missionaries and agents out across the Caliphate to spread their message. In 747, With the caliphate once more racked by revolt and civil war, the Abbasids will seize their chance. In eastern Khorasan, a general named Abu Muslim, probably a Persian convert, launches a revolt and takes the black banner of the Hashemites as his symbol. The Hashemites, descendants of Hashim, are the extended family of the Prophet, with the Abbasids prominent amongst them. This frontier region, today comprising northeastern Iran and parts of Turkmenistan and Afghanistan, is particularly ripe for rebellion. Here, Arabs and non-Arab converts live side by side. They intermarry and fight alongside each other to defend the frontier. For many, the Umayyads are distant and unpopular overlords. What's more, opposition has been stoked for decades by Hashemite agents and missionaries who seek to topple the Umayyads and replace them with one of their own. They have sowed the seeds of revolution. So when Abu Muslim begins his revolt, he quickly attracts followers, Arabs, Persians and Central Asians, many of whom are experienced warriors. And he proves a brilliant commander, winning a series of victories over Umayyad forces and occupying Kufa, capital of Iraq, in 749. The Abbasids now assume leadership of this revolution. And the following year, their forces meet the army of the Umayyad Caliph, Marwan II, at the Zab River. Most of what we know about the battle that follows comes from Abbasid sources. Caliph Marwan appears to have been a brave but reckless commander, launching a head-on cavalry charge against the Abbasid line. Abbasid historians tell how their own troops, inspired by recent victories, stand fast. Their spear walls repel the cavalry. The attack ends in disaster. Umayyad morale is broken, their army routed. Marwan himself flees the battle, but is pursued and killed in Egypt. Other Umayyads are likewise hunted down and exterminated. Even graves are desecrated. One surviving member of the dynasty, Abd al-Rahman, flees to Spain. Just a few years later, he establishes the Emirate of Cordoba, a second Umayyad dynasty that would flourish in Iberia for centuries. Meanwhile, Abul Abbas al-Saffah becomes the first Abbasid caliph, though it will take the Abbasids more than a decade to consolidate their hold on power. Al-Saffah moves the caliph's residence from Haran to Kufa, closer to the Abbasid power base in Persia. In 751, he sends an army to curb the westward expansion of the Chinese Tang dynasty. The campaign culminates in a bloody victory at the Battle of Talas, but also marks the limit of the caliphate's eastward expansion. Many who'd helped overthrow the Umayyads had sought the end of hereditary rule and a return to caliphs elected from within an elite group. They are to be disappointed. In 754, Al-Saffah is succeeded by his brother Al-Mansur. The Abbasids will be the new ruling dynasty, and Al-Mansur will prove one of its greatest caliphs. But his reign begins inauspiciously with the execution of the brilliant and popular General Abu Muslim, now regarded as a potentially dangerous rival. Al-Mansur faces rebellion by the Alids, a powerful clan descended from the Prophet's son-in-law, Ali. They resent the growing dynastic power of the Abbasids and press their own claim to rule. Al-Mansur crushes the last major Alid revolt in 762, ushering in an era of stability, prosperity and peace. That year, he orders the construction of a new capital on the banks of the Tigris River. Officially, it is to be known as Madinat as-Salam, the City of Peace. It will prove his greatest legacy, a city that will become one of the glories of the medieval world, Baghdad. In the reign of Al-Mansur's grandson, Harun al-Rashid, the caliphate flourishes as never before, with Baghdad at its heart. There are many legends told about Caliph Harun al-Rashid, the rightly guided. He is, after all, a central figure in 1001 Nights, the masterpiece of Arabic literature. The image of al-Rashid that reaches us from such sources is of a devout, wise and beneficent ruler who prayed 100 times a day and each morning gave 1,000 dirhams to good causes. In legend, al-Rashid wandered the streets of Baghdad disguised as a beggar to see how his subjects lived. He was a brilliant horseman and patron of the arts, and a keen chess player. His court was a place where religion and philosophy could be argued and debated openly, even, on occasion, by a woman. In the Caliphate, as in the rest of the medieval world, few women held high status in their own right. But as mothers, wives and concubines, they could exert huge influence. Al-Khazuran, once a Yemeni slave girl, rose from concubine to caliph's wife, and wielded significant power during the reign of her husband, Caliph al-Mahdi, and son, Caliph al-Rashid. Famed for her intelligence and learning, she held discussions on policy and military strategy, received foreign ambassadors, and intervened on questions of justice. Much of her own enormous wealth she spent on public works and charity. Many likened her to a co-ruler, or even the real caliph. The success of al-Rashid's reign was underpinned by efficient government and administration. Much of it was modelled on that of their predecessors, the Sassanids, and they made extensive use of Persian and Central Asian bureaucrats. Of particular note was the Barmakid family. The Barmakids were descended from high priests of the Buddhist temple of Nobahar, near Balkh, in modern Afghanistan. As early Abbasid allies, they played an important role in government, helping to foster an age of Islamic statecraft, imbued with elements of Sasanian Persian culture. They served the Abbasids well for 3 generations, but the power games of court could be dangerous and unpredictable. In 803, al-Rashid decided the Barmakids had got a little too big for their boots. The family experienced a sudden and dramatic fall from favour, with many of its members imprisoned or executed. Their demise ended Barmakid control of the post of vizier, a position that had recently emerged at court as the Caliph's senior advisor and chief minister. It was a role of enormous significance. Some viziers would later wield so much power, they overshadowed the Caliph himself. The fame of al-Rashid's court spread far and wide. Charlemagne, king of the Franks, Holy Roman Emperor and the most powerful ruler in Europe, sent several embassies to Baghdad. In return, al-Rashid sent him dazzling gifts, including perfume, ivory chessboards, a marvellous water clock, and even an elephant named Abu Abbas, which lived for several years at Charlemagne's court in Aachen. Cultural life in the Caliphate, and Baghdad in particular, was remarkably cosmopolitan. The Abbasid court even celebrated Persian holidays, such as Nowruz, Persian New Year. Such open-mindedness helped the caliphate to flourish as a center of culture, science, arts and medicine. The center of learning was the city's famous library, Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, though little of its function is known today. Here and across the caliphate, scholars translated classical works from Greek, Middle Persian and Sanskrit into Arabic. Their efforts ensured the survival of countless works that would otherwise have been lost, including those by great figures such as Aristotle and Galen. They also made many of their own original discoveries, knowledge that would come to be much sought after by the medieval West. Baghdad's scholars led the world in many fields. Al-Kindi, known as the philosopher of the Arabs, was a famed polymath who wrote on logic, psychology, astronomy, astrology, and many other topics. Al-Khwarizmi's contribution to mathematics led to him being dubbed the father of algebra. The Latinized version of his name, Algorithmus, is the origin of our word algorithm. The Christian scholar Hunayn ibn Ishaq was nicknamed the Sheikh of Translators for his role translating ancient texts into Arabic. Material culture also flourished under the Abbasids, with the introduction of glazed pottery in the 9th century, allowing new artistic possibilities. Many colourful pieces, decorated with animals and Kufic lettering, have been discovered across the former caliphate from this period. The Abbasid Caliphate also benefited from its position astride the Silk Roads, the name for the ancient network of trade routes linking Europe and Asia. Valuable imports travelled along this route, such as silk, spices, ivory, gemstones, and even thoroughbred horses. To encourage this trade, the Abbasids built new roads, as well as inns, hospices and wells for the comfort of travellers. New ideas and technology also flowed along the Silk Roads. Chinese papermaking techniques first reached the Muslim world under the Umayyads, but it was under the Abbasids that paper production really took off. Much cheaper than parchment or papyri, abundant supplies of paper transformed the practice of administration and bookmaking, and helped medieval Islam to become one of the most bookish cultures in world history. In the 7th century, the first Arab conquests had pushed the frontier of the Eastern Roman Empire back to the Taurus Mountains. Since then, the Caliphate and Empire had been in a state of almost perpetual war, with frequent raids by both sides across the Syrian frontier. Twice the Arabs had even besieged Constantinople itself, but failed to take the great city. In 782, al-Rashid himself had led an Abbasid force as far as the shores of the Bosphorus. By 804, the Eastern Roman Empire was paying annual tribute to the Caliphate. When Emperor Nikephoros stopped the payments, an Abbasid army crossed the Taurus Mountains and took his army by surprise at Knossos. The Romans suffered a heavy defeat. The emperor himself was lucky to escape with his life. The cycle of raid and counter-raid continued for years, with al-Rashid even moving the Abbasid capital to Raqqa to be closer to the frontier. But this fixation on his rival to the west may have blinded the Caliph to trouble in the east. In 809, news arrived of revolt in Khorasan. It was while travelling east to face down this rebellion that Caliph Harun al-Rashid became sick and died. His 22-year reign would come to be seen as a golden age for the Abbasid Caliphate, a time of prosperity, stability, intellectual and cultural achievement. But al-Rashid's own efforts to ensure a peaceful succession were about to backfire disastrously and plunge the Caliphate back into civil war. The Abbasid Caliphate had flourished under the reign of Caliph Harun al-Rashid. And to ensure its continued success, he arranged his succession in a way that he believed would ensure stability and peace. His son, Muhammad, was to be his heir, but in a move common since the time of the Umayyads, he also named another son, Abdullah, as Muhammad's heir. It proved a recipe for disaster. In 809, in Baghdad, Muhammad succeeded his father as caliph, taking the title Al-Amin, the Trustworthy. His half-brother, Abdullah, became governor of Khorasan with the title Al-Ma'mun, the Trusted One. Rival factions soon formed at both courts. In Baghdad, Al-Amin's advisors urged him to remove his brother from the succession. And just a year into his reign, he tore up his father's arrangement. Al-Ma'mun was furious. Fraternal distrust exploded into civil war. Al-Ma'mun's Khorasani forces won a great victory against a much larger force at Ray, and marched on to besiege Baghdad in 812. After a bloody year-long siege, the city fell. Caliph Al-Amin was captured as he tried to flee, and executed. Initially, Al-Ma'mun ruled the caliphate from his old base at Merv. Here, in an effort to widen his support after the civil war, he fostered a new alliance with the Alids. This powerful family was descended from Ali, fourth caliph and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad. They'd later become leaders of Shia Islam, the branch of Islam that believes true spiritual authority belongs to Ali's descendants. Instead of traditional Abbasid black, Al-Ma'mun's court began to wear green, a colour associated with the Alids. Al-Ma'mun even married two of his daughters into the Alid family, and made Alid Imam Ali al-Rida his heir apparent. But these policies sparked hostility back in Iraq, and led to major revolts in Baghdad. After 6 years, the Caliph moved the capital back there to restore order, and abandoned his Alid alliance. He's also remembered for his attempts to impose a new religious doctrine on the Caliphate. He first invited distinguished scholars to Baghdad to discuss theological issues, such as the deeds of the companions of the Prophet, the Hadiths, and the nature of the Quran. However, his pronouncement that the Quran was at some point created by God, rather than co-eternal with God, encountered bitter resistance. 18 years of religious persecution followed, a period known as the Minha, or Inquisition, which saw dissenting scholars imprisoned or even executed. In 833, Al-Ma'mun was succeeded by his brother, who took the title Al-Mutasim. He'd prove far less interested in theological debate than the clash of arms. The armies of the Abbasid Caliphate, renowned in battle, were drawn from both Arab and non-Arab subjects. The Khorasanis, soldiers of the frontier province of Khorasan, were the troops who'd helped propel the Abbasids to power during the Third Fitna, or Islamic civil war. drawing on Persian and steppe warrior traditions. Their ranks included both armoured infantry and heavy armoured cavalry, similar to European knights. The descendants of Khorasanis who settled near Baghdad were known as Abna al-Khorasan, sons of the people of Khorasan. Famed as elite and versatile infantrymen, they formed the loyal core of the Caliph's army. Other notable contingents included the Daylamis, expert skirmishers from the highlands of northern Persia. While African troops, including military slaves and Muslim converts from Ethiopia, fought as heavy infantry, armed with shield, sword and spear. The great Caliph Harun al-Rashid was known to have an elite bodyguard of 40 African soldiers. Abbasid armies were particularly skilled in siege warfare and made expert use of catapults, mangonels and battering rams. They even had specialist troops armed with naphtha or petroleum-based fire weapons. No contemporary illustrations are known, but they're thought to have been similar to this slightly later Byzantine illustration. The 9th century, however, would see changes so radical that some historians have termed it a military revolution. During the civil war between al-Rashid's sons, al-Mu'tasim had begun to expand his military retinue by purchasing Turkish slave soldiers. His favourite supplier was the Samanid family, governors of Transoxiana. These slave soldiers were seized from their villages as boys, or bought in slave markets, then sent for intensive military training alongside an Islamic education. They emerged as formidable cavalrymen and superbly skilled mounted archers. Al-Jahith, a contemporary, wrote of them with awe. The Turks are as good as others with the lance, and in addition, if 1,000 of their horsemen are hard-pressed, they will loose all their arrows in a single volley and bring down 1,000 enemy horsemen. No body of men can stand up to such a test. Let's dispute the exact timeline, but at some point in the 9th century, these Turkish slave soldiers, known as Mamluks, had come to form an elite corps within the Abbasid army, one that was personally loyal to the Caliph and could be used to intimidate his political rivals. Turkish officers, despite their initial outsider status and ignorance of Arabic language and customs, began to wield huge influence at the Caliph's court. This offended the old nobility, many of whom also stopped receiving traditional diwan payments for their military service. The discontent even pushed some soldiers to riot in the streets of Baghdad. To ease tension, al-Mu'tasim constructed a new city for the Turkish military elite, Samarra. This was where he garrisoned the Turks and rewarded their commanders with land. And it's where, in 848, work began on the world's largest mosque and its famous spiral minaret. Al-Mu'tasim's reliance on slave soldiers to shore up his power had destroyed centuries of military tradition, and it had sown the seeds of future turmoil. 2 years later, the Caliph led his formidable new army against the old foe, the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. The campaign ended in a great victory, the capture and sack of Amorium. O day of the Battle of Amorium, our hopes have returned from you, overflowing with honey-sweet milk, wrote Arab poet Abu Tamam. Even such victories failed to ease the tension between Turkish officers and Abbasid nobles. Some nobles even plotted to overthrow al-Mutasim and expel the Turks. But their conspiracy was discovered, and they were executed. The Seljuk Turks were pastoralists, nomadic livestock farmers from the Central Asian steppe. They were fierce warriors who became champions of Sunni Islam. At the end of the 10th century, possibly in response to climate change, they swept south into Khorasan. The Ghaznavid Empire, successor to the Samanids, was first to fall. The Seljuk Turks were unstoppable, surging westwards across the Persian plateau, taking Baghdad and toppling the Umayyads, crushing a Byzantine army at Manzikert, and forging the great Seljuk Empire. Their triumph was tempered by the arrival of European crusaders, who took Jerusalem in 1099 and carved out a series of crusader states. One Shia sect, shrouded in legend, struck back at the Seljuks with deadly precision. In 1092, Nizam al-Mulk, vizier of the Seljuk Empire, was killed by the Order of Assassins, its hit squad disguised as Sufi mystics. The Assassins, or Hashashin as they're known in Arabic, were a new Ismaili military order formed in the mountains of northwestern Persia. Facing powerful enemies, but without an army of their own, they turned to subterfuge and assassination to achieve their goals. Many fanciful stories are told about the Assassins, but the order was real and feared, and responsible for scores of political murders over the next 2 centuries. Under the Seljuks, Abbasid caliphs continued to reign as spiritual leaders and figureheads. But the 12th century saw the fracturing of the great Seljuk Empire, a familiar story of disputed successions and local governors making their bid for power. Sensing weakness, in 1136, Abbasid Caliph al-Muqtafi raised his own army to reassert Abbasid independence for the first time in nearly 2 centuries. He took control of Baghdad, and in 1157 held it against a Seljuk siege. After generations of foreign subjugation, the Abbasids had re-emerged as an independent power. But it would soon all come crashing down. Al-Mutasim was succeeded by his eldest son, Al-Wathiq. Following his unexpected death, a second son, Al-Mutawakkil, took the throne, backed by the Turk generals. They'd hoped for a pliable puppet, but instead, Al-Mutawakkil decided it was time to reassert caliphal authority. On his orders, several Turkish leaders were assassinated, and he tried to use Arab and Armenian troops to counterbalance their influence. But the Turks struck back. In 861, the Caliph was assassinated by his own bodyguards. The chaos and civil war that followed is known as the Decade of Anarchy. 4 caliphs took power, all puppets of the Turkish military elite. Each, in turn, was violently overthrown. Order was only restored with the accession of Caliph al-Mu'tamid in 870. But the anarchy had irreparably damaged the Caliph's authority. Even before the Abbasids came to power, the vast Caliphate had struggled to maintain control of its many regions. Abbasid authority west of Egypt had long been largely theoretical. But now, multiple major uprisings broke out as local governors and warlords staked out their own claims to rule. Egypt, fertile and prosperous, was an early casualty, lost to a rebel Turkish commander who founded his own Tulunid dynasty. In southern Iraq, a major revolt broke out among agricultural slaves from Eastern Africa, known as Zanj. The 14-year uprising devastated the region and severely disrupted Abbasid tax income and Baghdad's food supply. In Afghanistan, a coppersmith named Yaqub al-Safar made an astonishing rise to power, founding his own Safarid dynasty and conquering much of eastern Persia. His advance was only halted at the Battle of Deir al-Akul in 876. In such turbulent times, Abbasid caliphs struggled to impose their authority. But there were some successes. Caliph al-Mu'tadid engineered a brief Abbasid resurgence, thanks to military campaigning and shrewd diplomacy, notably his marriage to the daughter of the Tulunid ruler of Egypt. She was the celebrated Qutr al-Nada. Her name means dewdrop. One scholar described her as one of the most intelligent and regal women who ever lived. When al-Mu'tadid told his bride, "You've done well for yourself by marrying the Caliph. What more could you thank God for?" She replied, "You've done well for yourself. This makes my father your subject. What more could you thank God for?" Her bold response was a sign of her character, as well as the delicate new balance of power between Abbasid caliphs and some of their more powerful subjects. During the reign of al-Mu'tadid's son, al-Muqtafi, Tulunid Egypt was fully reabsorbed into the Abbasid Caliphate. But elsewhere, the news was dire. Abbasid authority collapsed in Arabia, where one Shiite group, the Qarmatians, even began attacking pilgrims on their way to Holy Mecca. In 930, they stole the Black Stone, the Holy of Holies, from the Kaaba, a terrible blow to Abbasid prestige. In Central Asia, the Persian Samanids carved out their own empire and declared independence. This was the height of the so-called Persian Intermezzo, when native Persian dynasties ruled in Persia once more. Increasingly, the Abbasid Caliph was said to reign, but not rule. He'd become a symbol without power, often under the thumb of his vizier. By the 930s, the Caliph had lost control of both the civilian administration and army command, which was handed over to a new official, the Amir al-Umara, commander of the commanders. The final humiliation came in 945. The Umayyads were Shiite warlords from the Dailam mountains of northwestern Persia, but their first success was in Fars, before they went on to seize control of Persia and Iraq. Their triumphal entry into Baghdad was a deep humiliation for the Sunni Abbasids. Yet they retained the title of Caliph, as no more than figureheads under Umayyad command, and spectators to these turbulent times. 2 decades later, another Shiite dynasty, the Fatimids, swept along the North African coast, conquered Egypt, and founded Cairo as the capital of their own caliphate. Some historians label this the Shiite century, with Shiite dynasties ruling twin caliphates and dominating much of the Muslim world. But it was not to last. A dangerous new Sunni power was poised to burst out of Central Asia: the Seljuk Turks. In the 13th century, a new force from the east tore through the Islamic world, scattering armies and destroying every city that did not submit to them. The Mongols. First to fall, the Khwarezmian Empire, successor to the Seljuks, overrun by the Mongol hordes of Genghis Khan. By 1256, his grandson, Hulagu, was poised to renew the onslaught. But first, he turned his attention to the assassins, rumored to be plotting his death. The order was scattered and crushed. 2 years later, Hulagu advanced against the Abbasid caliphate. As his armies neared Baghdad, he sent a stern warning to Caliph al-Mustasim, demanding the city's surrender. Despite the Mongols' terrifying record of destroying any city that opposed them, al-Mustasim decided Baghdad's walls could keep out any steppe nomads. He was wrong. After half Baghdad's garrison was massacred in a disastrous sortie, the city surrendered. But Hulagu was in no mood for mercy. A contemporary chronicler described the horrors that followed. The people of Baghdad were put to the sword and subjected to 40 days of killing, pillaging, and enslavement. They tortured people to extort their wealth. They killed men, women, and children. A great part of the city, including the Caliph's mosque, was burnt, and the city laid in ruins. The dead lay like mounds in the streets and markets. The death toll is unknown, but was in the many thousands. Allegedly, only Christians were spared, thanks to the intercession of Hulagu's Christian wife. Baghdad's libraries were destroyed, their books and manuscripts, representing centuries of Muslim scholarship, were thrown into the Tigris River, so that it was said to run black with ink. Al-Mustasim was forced to witness this terrible destruction. Then, according to several sources, he was rolled in a carpet and trampled to death, as Mongols feared to spill royal blood. The last caliph of Baghdad was dead. Never again would the Abbasids hold meaningful political power. Al-Mustasim was not the last Abbasid caliph. The line would continue under the Mamluk Sultanate that now ruled Egypt. But his successors in Cairo were merely ceremonial figures, religious leaders with little power. The last caliph, Al-Mutawakkil III, surrendered to the Ottoman Empire in 1517 and was taken away as a prisoner to Constantinople. It was a humiliating fate for a dynasty that had once ruled one of history's greatest empires, one that had dominated the Middle East, that had taken on and defeated the Byzantines in the west and Chinese in the east, that had overseen a great flourishing of scholarship, culture, technology, and trade, and reigned over the era that is remembered as Islam's golden age. For centuries to come, Islamic leaders would assert their legitimacy by claiming descent from this one towering dynasty, the Abbasids.